The ship Arcadia descended through Europa's thin atmosphere, a sleek needle piercing the veil between known and unknown. Dr. Lena Alvarez watched the approach through the observation window, her breath creating ephemeral patterns on the glass. The moon's surface, once a distant abstraction of scientific data and grainy satellite images, now resolved itself into a landscape of nightmares and wonder. Jagged ice fields stretched to the horizon, their crystalline structures refracting the dim sunlight, in ways that seemed to defy the laws of optics. Deep fissures crisscrossed the terrain, black wounds in the pale flesh of the moon. And beneath it all, hidden from view, but felt in every vibration of the ship, the vast subsurface, ocean sloshed and churned, a primordial soup of possibilities and terrors. Lena pressed her hand against the cold glass, feeling the barrier between her and the alien world beyond. A shiver ran through her, not from the temperature, but from a sensation she couldn't quite name. It was as if Europa itself was aware of their presence, its icy gaze fixed upon the intruders who dared to breach its solitude. "We're down," Captain Oliver Trent's voice crackled over the intercom, startling Lena from her reverie. "Prepare for the first EVA." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of history. They were the first humans to set foot on Europa, pioneers on the frontier of space exploration. But as Lena turned away from the window to don her exosuit, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were trespassers in a realm not meant for human eyes. The exosuit enveloped her like a second skin, its systems humming to life as she performed the pre-EVA checks. Each click of a seal, each green light on the diagnostic panel brought her closer to the moment of truth. She tried to focus on the familiar routines, on the years of training that had led her to this point, but her mind kept drifting back to the alien landscape waiting outside. As she made her way to the airlock, Lena caught glimpses of her fellow crew members. Sarah, the xenobiologist, her eyes bright with barely contained excitement. Alexei, the geologist, his weathered face set in lines of concentration. And Captain Trent, his gaze sharp and focused, carrying the responsibility of their mission in the set of his shoulders. They had trained together for years, becoming a cohesive unit, a family of sorts. But now, standing on the threshold of the unknown, Lena felt a strange distance between them. It was as if each of them stood alone, isolated in their own bubble of anticipation and fear. The airlock cycled, and the outer door opened with a hiss of escaping air. Europa lay before them, no longer a view through a window, but a tactile reality. Lena took a deep breath, tasting the sterile air of her suit, and stepped forward. The first footstep on Europa's surface sent a tremor through her body. The ice crunched beneath her boot, a sound that seemed to echo across the vast emptiness around them. For a moment, the universe held its breath. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, Lena felt it. A vibration, so faint she thought she might be imagining it. It thrummed through the soles of her feet, up her legs, settling in the pit of her stomach. She looked at her companions, wondering if they felt it too, but their faces betrayed no sign of unease. As they began to set up the initial survey equipment, Lena tried to push the sensation to the back of her mind. She was a scientist, trained to observe and analyze, not to indulge in fanciful notions. But as she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. Not with eyes, perhaps, but with some alien sense that defied human understanding. The EVA lasted for hours, but to Lena, it felt both eternal and fleeting. When they finally returned to the Arcadia, she felt a mix of relief and reluctance. The ship's interior, once familiar and comforting, now seemed confining, as if some part of her had been left behind on the icy surface, calling her back. That night, as Lena lay in her bunk, the vibration she had felt on the surface seemed to follow her. It pulsed through the ship's hull, a faint but persistent rhythm that matched the beating of her heart. She closed her eyes, trying to will herself to sleep, but her dreams were filled with visions of ice and darkness, and something moving in the depths below. The ruins emerged from the ice like the bones of some long-dead leviathan. Lena stood at the edge of the excavation site, her breath catching in her throat as she took in the impossible sight before her. The structures defied easy categorization, their geometry an affront to human architectural sensibilities. Surfaces that should have been flat curved in ways that hurt the eyes to follow, while angles that seemed acute from one perspective revealed themselves to be obtuse from another. The material of the ruins was equally perplexing. It resembled polished metal, but it rippled and shifted like a liquid when caught in the right light. Lena reached out a gloved hand, hesitating for a moment before making contact. The surface felt solid to the touch, but there was a warmth to it that seemed at odds with the frigid environment. "Definitely not natural," Alexei muttered beside her, his voice sounding distant and muffled through the comm system. Lena turned to look at him, noticing the way his eyes darted nervously across the alien landscape. She wondered if he felt it too, the growing sense of unease that had been building since their arrival. As they moved deeper into the ruins, Lena's attention was drawn to the walls. Strange symbols covered every surface, spiraling inward in dizzying patterns. They seemed to pulse with a faint luminescence, though Lena couldn't be sure if it was a trick of the light or something more active. She crouched beside what appeared to be a console of some sort, its surface smooth and featureless. As her hand hovered over it, she felt a familiar vibration, the same she'd sensed on their first EVA, but stronger now. It resonated through her suit, through her bones, settling at the base of her skull like a persistent itch. "Do you feel that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexei looked at her, his brow furrowed. "Feel what?" Lena opened her mouth to explain, but the words wouldn't come. How could she describe this sensation, this pressure that seemed to exist both within and without her body? She shook her head, turning back to the console. As she studied the alien device, the vibration intensified. It was no longer just a physical sensation. It had taken on an almost auditory quality, a hum, low and insistent, that seemed to emanate from the very walls around them. Captain Trent's voice cut through her thoughts, sharp and commanding. "We're bringing in the data. Start analysis immediately." Lena stood, casting one last glance at the enigmatic symbols on the walls. For a moment, she thought she saw them shift, rearranging themselves like pieces of a cosmic puzzle. She blinked, and the illusion was gone. Back aboard the Arcadia, the mood was a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The crew gathered around the holographic display, watching as the scan data coalesced into a three-dimensional representation of the ruins. The energy readings scrolled across adjacent screens, a cascade of numbers and waveforms that defied conventional understanding. "These readings, they're impossible," Sarah murmured, her eyes wide as she scrolled through the data. "The energy signatures don't match anything in our database. It's as if they're operating on principles of physics we don't even understand." Lena studied the waveforms, feeling a strange sense of familiarity. The patterns, seemingly random at first glance, began to resolve themselves in her mind. She could almost hear them, a silent symphony playing at the edge of her consciousness. "We're not alone," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and fear. "Something was here." Lena wanted to correct her, to voice the certainty that had been growing in her mind since they first landed. Whatever had built these ruins, whatever force was behind the strange energy readings, it wasn't gone. It was here, now, all around them, watching, waiting. But the words caught in her throat, held back by a fear she couldn't quite name. Instead, she turned back to the data, losing herself in the alien patterns that seemed to whisper secrets just beyond her understanding. The dreams began on the fifth night. Lena found herself floating in an endless ocean, the pressure of countless tons of water and ice pressing down on her. In the distance, she could see the faint glow of bioluminescent creatures, their forms twisting in ways that defied biological possibility. And always there was the hum, a pulsing, rhythmic sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. She woke, gasping for air, her sheets damp with sweat. The hum followed her into wakefulness, a persistent vibration that she could feel in her teeth, in her bones. Lena pressed her hands to her ears, but it did nothing to quiet the sound. It was coming from inside her. As she made her way to the mess hall, Lena noticed changes in her crewmates. Sarah, usually animated and talkative during meals, sat silently, pushing her food around her plate. Her movements were slow, almost dreamlike, and her eyes seemed unfocused, staring at something beyond the confines of the ship. Alexei looked worse. His face was pale, drawn, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. As Lena watched, he raised a hand to his nose, and a thin trickle of blood ran down his upper lip. "Are you all right?" Lena asked, her voice sounding strange and distant in her own ears. Alexei looked up, startled, as if he hadn't noticed her approach. He wiped the blood away with the back of his hand, leaving a red smear across his pale skin. "Just a nosebleed," he muttered. "Been getting them a lot lately. Probably just the dry air in here." But Lena could see the fear in his eyes, the knowledge that this was something more than just dry air. She wanted to press further, to share her own experiences, but something held her back. A growing paranoia, a sense that to speak of these changes would somehow make them more real. As the day progressed, the symptoms became harder to ignore. The persistent ringing in their ears, which medical scans couldn't explain. The way colours seemed more vivid, sounds more intense. Lena found herself losing time, coming back to awareness to find that hours had passed without her noticing. And always, there was the hum. It had grown stronger, no longer something imagined or subtle. It vibrated through the walls of the Arcadia, a constant reminder of the alien presence that surrounded them. During the evening briefing, Lena finally voiced her concerns. "We need to leave," she said, the words feeling heavy on her tongue. "Something is affecting us. This energy. It's not safe." She expected argument, resistance. What she didn't expect was the look in Captain Trent's eyes. There was something off about them. The usual sharp intelligence was still there, but it was overlaid with something else. A darkness, a hollowness that sent a chill down Lena's spine. "We've barely scratched the surface," Trent said, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of eagerness. "NASA didn't send us here to leave empty-handed." As Lena looked around the room, she saw the same strange look in the eyes of her crewmates. They were changing, all of them, and whatever they were changing into, it wasn't entirely human anymore. That night, as Lena lay in her quarters, the hum grew to a crescendo. It filled her mind, drowning out all other thoughts. She could feel it reshaping her, rewriting the very essence of who she was. Her skin crawled, her bones ached, and in the darkness behind her closed eyelids she saw visions of a world beyond human comprehension. She was becoming something else. They all were, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. By the 9th day, the changes were impossible to ignore. Lena stood before the mirror in her quarters, barely recognizing the face that stared back at her. Her skin had taken on a pale, almost translucent quality, with a faint iridescent sheen that shifted in the light. Her eyes, once a deep brown, now gleamed with a golden hue. The pupils elongated into vertical slits like those of a cat. But it wasn't just her appearance that had changed. Her senses had sharpened to an almost painful degree. She could hear the hum of the ship's systems, once a barely noticeable background noise, as clearly as if someone was speaking directly into her ear. The taste of the recycled air, the texture of her clothing against her skin. Everything was heightened, intense. And then there were the other senses, the ones she had no names for. She could feel the presence of her crewmates, even through the walls of the ship, like points of light in her mind. The ruins on EUROPA's surface called to her, a siren song that pulled at something deep within her altered DNA. Lena made her way to the medical bay, drawn by an instinct she didn't fully understand. She found Sarah there, hunched over a microscope. As Sarah looked up, Lena had to stifle a gasp. The The xenobiologist's transformation was even more pronounced than her own. Sarah's skin had become almost completely transparent in places, revealing a network of glowing veins beneath. Her eyes, now a brilliant gold, seemed to shine with an inner light. "Fascinating, isn't it?" Sarah said, her voice carrying harmonics that no human vocal cords should have been able to produce. She gestured to the microscope. "Our cellular structure is changing at a rate that should be impossible. It's as if our very atoms are being rewritten." Lena approached cautiously, peering into the microscope. What she saw made her head spin. The cells on the slide were in constant motion, shifting and reforming in patterns that defied biological understanding. And at the center of each cell, where the nucleus should have been, was a pulsing point of light that matched the rhythm of the ever-present hum. "What's happening to us?" Lena whispered, though she feared she already knew the answer. Sarah's lips curved into a smile that was both beautiful and terrifying. "We're evolving, Lena. Becoming something more." The word more hung in the air between them, laden with implications that Lena's still partially human mind struggled to comprehend. She backed away from Sarah, suddenly afraid of what her crewmate, her friend, was becoming. As she turned to leave, she nearly collided with Alexei. The geologist looked gaunt, his skin stretched tight over bones that seemed to have rearranged themselves into alien configurations. His eyes, sunken deep into their sockets, glowed with the same golden light as Sarah's. "The dreams," Alexei said, his voice a raspy whisper. "Do you have them too? I see the city, Lena. The real city, not just the ruins. It's beautiful." Lena nodded, unable to find words. She had seen it too in her dreams, a vast metropolis of impossible architecture, shimmering beneath Europa's icy crust. A city not built for human habitation, but for beings of unimaginable form and function. As she made her way back to her quarters, Lena's mind raced. They weren't just ill or mutating randomly. They were becoming something specific. That night, as Lena drifted into uneasy sleep, the visions came stronger than ever. She saw the ruins not as they were now, but as they had been millions of years ago. A thriving complex of alien life and technology. She understood the purpose of machines whose function had eluded human science, read meaning in symbols that had seemed like random patterns just days before. And through it all, she felt a presence, vast, ancient, and utterly inhuman. It regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and anticipation, like a scientist observing a particularly interesting specimen. Lena wanted to recoil, to hide from its alien scrutiny, but she found herself drawn to it, yearning for the knowledge it promised. When she woke, gasping and covered in sweat, Lena knew that they had passed a point of no return. The person, the human, she had been when they landed on Europa was gone, replaced by something that straddled the line between terrestrial and alien. She rose from her bunk, her movements fluid and graceful in a way that would have been impossible for her former self. The ship's gravity, once a constant reminder of their tether to Earth, now felt oppressive, wrong. Lena found herself longing for the crushing depths of Europa's ocean, for the freedom of movement it promised. As she made her way to the command center, Lena's heightened senses picked up the subtle changes in the Arcadia itself. The ship's hull seemed to pulse with the same rhythm that now flowed through her veins. The air tasted different, charged with an energy that made her skin tingle. It was as if the barrier between the crew and their environment was dissolving, the distinction between organic and inorganic blurring with each passing moment. Captain Trent was already at his station when Lena entered, his fingers dancing over holographic displays with inhuman speed and precision. He turned to her and Lena had to suppress a shudder. Trent's transformation was the most advanced of them all. His skin had taken on a metallic sheen, and his eyes glowed with an intense, otherworldly light. "Dr. Alvarez," he said, his voice resonating with harmonics that seemed to bypass her ears and speak directly to her mind. "I trust you're adapting well to the changes." Lena opened her mouth to respond, but found she no longer needed to speak aloud. Her thoughts, projected effortlessly, carried on waves of the energy that now permeated the ship. "What's happening to us, Captain?" "What aren't you telling us?" A smile played across Trent's lips, revealing teeth that had sharpened into points. "We're becoming what we were always meant to be, Lena. The next step in human evolution, though perhaps human is no longer the right word." Before Lena could press further, alarms blared throughout the ship. On the main view screen, a message flashed. "Incoming transmission. NASA command. Priority Alpha." Trent's expression hardened. "It seems our handlers are growing impatient," he muttered, more to himself than to Lena. He tapped a series of commands, and the face of NASA's mission director filled the screen. "Captain Trent," the director began, his voice tight with barely contained anxiety, "we've lost telemetry from the Arcadia's main systems. Your last data burst showed alarming changes in the crew's biosignatures. Explain your situation immediately." Lena watched as Trent straightened, his bearing suddenly more formal, more human. It was a mask, she realized, one he could don and discard at will. "Director," he replied, his voice devoid of the alien harmonics from moments ago. "We've made a breakthrough in our understanding of the Europa ruins. The energy field they emit has accelerated our research beyond our wildest expectations." The director's eyes narrowed. "And the crew's physical changes. Our sensors indicate severe genetic mutations." "A side effect of our enhanced understanding," Trent said smoothly. "I assure you everything is proceeding according to plan." "According to whose plan?" Lena projected, unable to keep the accusation from her thoughts. Trent's eyes flicked to her for a moment, a warning glance that spoke volumes. To the director, he continued, "We'll need more time to fully analyze our findings. I recommend maintaining radio silence for the next 72 hours to prevent any potential contamination of our data." The director hesitated, clearly wrestling with the decision. Finally, he nodded. "Very well, Captain. 72 hours, but if we don't hear from you by then, we'll initiate emergency protocols. NASA out." As the transmission ended, Trent's carefully maintained human facade melted away. He turned to Lena, his eyes blazing with an intensity that made her take an involuntary step back. "You want answers, Dr. Alvarez? Then let me show you the truth." Without waiting for a response, Trent strode towards the airlock. Lena followed, drawn by a mixture of fear and an insatiable curiosity that she suspected was no longer entirely her own. They didn't bother with exosuits. Their transformed bodies no longer needed protection from Europa's harsh environment. As the outer door cycled open, Lena felt a rush of exhilaration. The cold that should have killed her instantly instead invigorated her, and the lack of atmosphere posed no problem for lungs that no longer required oxygen. Trent led her across the icy surface, moving with a speed and grace that defied the moon's gravity. They reached the excavation site in minutes, descending into the alien ruins that had become more familiar to Lena than her own reflection. At the heart of the complex, Trent placed his hand on a previously featureless wall. The surface rippled at his touch, and a hidden door slid open, revealing a chamber that hummed with power. "This," Trent said, gesturing to a pulsing crystal at the center of the room, "is what NASA sent us to find, the key to unlocking humanity's next great leap forward." Lena stared at the crystal, its pulsing light reflecting in her altered eyes. Something deep within her recoiled at the sight, a last vestige of her humanity crying out in warning. "What do you mean, Trent? How long have you known about this?" Trent's face, barely recognizable now, twisted into a grimace. "I've known since the beginning, Lena. We all have, on some level. We were chosen for this mission long before we were born." The words hit Lena like a physical blow. She staggered back, her mind reeling. "What are you saying?" "NASA's been aware of these ruins for decades," Trent continued, his voice devoid of emotion. "They've known about the transformative properties of this technology, and they've been preparing for it." Lena felt sick, the alien changes in her body suddenly feeling like a violation. Preparing? How? We were engineered, Lena. From the moment of conception, our DNA was manipulated to be compatible with this. He gestured to the crystal and the ruins around them. We're not explorers. We're not scientists. We're guinea pigs. The truth crashed over Lena like a tidal wave. Every memory, every achievement, every moment of her life took on a sinister new context. Her exceptional aptitude for science, her fascination with space, her selection for this mission, none of it had been her own. She had been crafted, molded from birth for this moment. No, she whispered, her voice breaking. No, it can't be true. My family, my life. All part of the experiment, Trent said, and for the first time, Lena heard the deep sorrow in his voice. Our families were chosen too, given specific instructions on how to raise us. Everything, every aspect of our lives was designed to bring us here. Lena's legs gave out and she sank to the floor of the alien chamber. The changes in her body, which had seemed wondrous and terrifying before, now felt like a cruel joke. She wasn't evolving, she was being erased, her very essence overwritten by an alien force she never agreed to embrace. Why? She managed to ask through her tears. Why would they do this to us? Trent knelt beside her, his transformed hand resting on her shoulder. To see if it could be done. To create a bridge between humanity and whatever built this place. We're the prototype, Lena. The test run for the future of human exploration. As the full implications sank in, Lena felt something break inside her. Every dream, every ambition, every love, all of it had been orchestrated. She wasn't Lena Alvarez, brilliant scientist and explorer. She was Subject L, a carefully crafted experiment, expendable in the grand scheme of NASA's ambitions. The crystal pulsed, its alien energy washing over them. Lena felt the changes accelerating, her body and mind transforming further with each moment. But now, instead of wonder, she felt only horror and grief. We can't go back, can we? She asked, already knowing the answer. Trent shook his head. We were never meant to. Our mission was always one way. Either we'd succeed in the transformation and become whatever it is we're becoming, or we'd fail and die here. Either way, NASA gets their data. Lena thought of Earth, of the family she now realized had never truly been hers, of the life she had lived unknowingly as a lab rat. Tears flowed down her altered face, sizzling as they hit the alien floor. The chamber around them hummed with increasing intensity. The transformation was reaching its peak. Lena could feel her human memories, her sense of self, slipping away like sand through an hourglass. I don't want to forget, she whispered, clutching at Trent. Please, I don't want to forget who I was. But it was too late. The alien consciousness surged through them, erasing what remained of Lena Alvarez and Oliver Trent. Their bodies, no longer recognizably human, slumped to the floor of the chamber. In the cold, indifferent ruins of Europa, 4 beings that had once been human lay transformed. Their humanity, their dreams, their very essence sacrificed on the altar of scientific progress. They had come seeking knowledge, but in the end they had lost everything, including themselves. And millions of miles away in the sterile halls of NASA, emotionless scientists pored over the data streaming in from the Arcadia's final transmission. The experiment was a success. The subjects had transformed. The next phase could begin.